Hi, this is Greg, and I'm talking with Marina about nutrition. Last episode, I asked Marina questions. This episode, she's asking me questions about how we got interested in nutrition, what we're learning, what our experience has been, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Greg, for joining. I'm actually really happy and excited to get to know your ideas behind nutrition and also related to economy and all the interest that you had. And I'm happy that we kind of have a certain topic that it's common and we both enjoy. So thank you so much actually for joining.
My pleasure.
And yeah, I was actually wondering, and I will start with a very intriguing question here. How did you get interested in diet, nutrition issue, and everything that is related to health?
It's just very recent. It's funny. I mean, I read Nina Teicholz has a book called The Big Fat Surprise, and it's critical of the government food pyramid, the federal government, and the standards that have been around since the 1980s. And, you know, I when the book came out, I bought a copy. I had it on my shelf. I read part of it, but it didn't affect my diet, right? I mean, I read the stuff about she was saying, but I didn't change what I ate. But it was only in March 2020 that I looked in the mirror at myself sideways and my gut stuck out. I mean, I could pull it in and that was good exercise, but I mean, I couldn't pretend that I wasn't getting fat. Now, not super heavy, but the point is it's gradual. So every year you sort of ratchet up a few pounds. Well, you get into so my dad, the same thing. He was slender when he was young. And even in his 40s, when I grew up, Dad was always skinny or slender. But then he was fat. I mean, it happened so gradually. And then he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So that was the big thing. I thought, well, holy smokes, maybe it was a shock to my dad when he was diagnosed because he'd always been healthy and active. So maybe the same thing would happen to me. So that got me thinking about this stuff. I got a scale and it showed me as obese, over 30 for the body fat measure and BMI, which is not as accurate. So I started watching videos about nutrition, and I watched Nina Teicholz, who wrote this book that I had. Watched her give a presentation, and it was basically saying that, most of our calories come from carbohydrates, and that's only happened since the 1980s. I mean, it's a new thing. So we grew up with it because a giant government sort of public health push toward it. So that got me thinking about it. And then I just started changing what I ate. I stopped eating cereal for breakfast, which has tons of sugar.
Right. And did this make you go and try diet yourself? Because there's those famous one, Atkins and keto diet, low carb, and all those things. But there's so much information, as we talked last time, that you don't know what to do and what's best for your body. So was this a trigger for you to start a new diet yourself, start how it goes, see how it goes for your body?
So I have a roundabout answer for that. And I hope it's not too roundabout. There's a funny, interesting story from sociologist Rodney Stark about religion. When a new religion starts, like the Unification Church started in the US, the people who joined the church weren't Christians, weren't people who jumped from another Christian faith to the church, Unification Church. There were people who had no interest in religion, had never been interested in religion, and they fell into it. And this is the nature of what you could call cults. People, there's nothing, they don't think about religion, and one is presented to them by a group of friends around them, they join full out. So similarly with diets, I've never been on a diet. I never even thought about a diet. I thought, well, gosh, I'm a little heavy, I should lose some weight. And then within a day or two, I'm ravenously hungry. But I've never, thought I'm going to join the Atkins diet or this diet or that diet. I have changed my eating patterns. There's a past example from 20 years ago, but I've never, because I played basketball, I'm fairly active. I gained weight gradually. So it's not like I woke up one day and I'm think I got to lose 20 pounds. It's never really happened. So when this happened, it was my first time, which is why I joined the cult, the keto carnivore, low carb. I was all in for it because I'd never had this mental shift that these foods are better than those foods. So that's a roundabout answer.
Right. So now, what are you, because I noticed you've been invited to several podcasts to talk about nutrition, but again, we're not doctors, we're not nutritionists or dietitians, but you're still giving some advice to other people. So how does this go? Did you receive some bad feedback or good feedback, or what's your approach on this on this method, let's say?
So I have another roundabout answer, I'm afraid. And it starts in the 1920s because the only times people in America, Germany, Italy heard politicians is when they came by in a train or on a stage and were shouting at them in the distance because there were no microphones, there was no radio. You just had these guys yelling at you, trying to project their voice. And it's not like a one-on-one conversation. Radio was invented, and all of a sudden, for Americans, they were in their living room listening to the President of the United States in a fireside chat, just calmly talking to them about ideas. One of the reasons Roosevelt was so dominating in the U.S. is he was the first president to speak, chat in the living room. And unfortunately, the same thing in Germany and Italy, where the leaders used radio to have a huge influence on the population. So now, moving forward, we've had people, ads on radio that are sort of commotion or TV. But in the last number of years, we've had these podcasts where we can walk around and listening to a conversation by people that isn't overproduced, just chatting about ideas. So for the last year and a half, I've been walking, listening to podcasts with doctors. So Diet Doctor podcast, Low Carb MD, Low Carb Down Under, and others that are back and forth on nutrition. So I've been listening to maybe 100 medical researchers, doctors, talk about the science of metabolic health, nutrition, insulin resistance. And, it's not the same as having people in my living room chat with me, but the conversational nature of it, the low carb MD guys in particular, they're chatty, they're making fun of each other, they're goofy. And I get to think of them as friends. And so when I was recently on this Life's Best Medicine, Brian Lenskis, who's the co-host of Low Carb MD, I felt like I knew him because I've been listening to him for a year. I got to talk to him in person, and it was like no big deal because I've known him for so long. But of course, it's the first time he ever, heard from me. But my argument, you asked me how I got influenced. I'm listening to the history and the medical research of dozens of doctors and nutritionists and historians, beginning with Gary Taubes and Nina Teicholz, who are journalists, and they just said, here's our 10 years of research interviewing hundreds of doctors. So unfortunately, a long answer, but that's, I think, the influence is these people have done the research on this, and this is their findings.
And if I may ask, what type of nutrition advice are you giving to people, or you're aiming to not promote, it's a big word, but from your experience, right? What people should expect from your podcast? What's your idea behind it?
So, everyone tries to be unique perhaps, but my positioning on this is as a researcher, not a doctor or nutritionist or someone promoting a new diet. So I'm sort of saying, don't diet, research nutrition, because my view is that when you learn stuff, it has an impact on you. You can't forget it. It's the same with, in economics, when I present the history of, let's say, light rail and transportation. Once you know the history and the economic nuts and bolts of light rail versus buses versus highways, you can't forget what you know. So I don't want to tell people what to believe about transportation, but if you understand the economic, there's a certain realities of it, it influences your views. So similarly with nutrition, I think so. The first thing is everyone's different. N equals 1, and the most important thing is to measure your own metabolism. So, for example, if you're having trouble with, day to day, they'd all these guys say the same thing. Well, think about what you're eating. Everything is about what you eat and how your body metabolizes it. And of course, you're feeding this microbiome of 1 trillion microbes in your gut, and you don't know who they are. You don't know what they want, but they tell you if you've given them something they don't like. You stagger around and fall in your bed. So you're gradually trying to discover how your metabolism and your microbiome react to the foods you eat. Now, there's theories about fat, about carbohydrates, about protein, about this and that, vitamin D, things like that. But each person has to find a way to measure what happens when they eat things. And, they say there's little tiny cameras you can swallow where doctors can look around through your insides, but even that doesn't tell you. So to be more specific, a continuous glucose monitor would tell you when your glucose spikes and what food, because you want a stable glucose level. So when you eat sugar or carbs, that's a glucose spike in your bloodstream usually, and insulin has to cover it. But it's hard for us to see that. So so the story I'm telling is you learn this stuff, then you can think back and reflect on what you're eating and what it does to you. And you go, they talk about the elimination diet. You eliminate the things. For example, as an example, my hips hurt. My hips are, I don't know what it is, but they ache. Not always, but a bunch. So maybe there's something I'm eating. Maybe it's milk. Maybe it's wine. Maybe it's coffee. So an elimination diet would try to change what I eat and see if it helps a condition, my hips hurting.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's funny you're saying that because I was reading, and not only reading, but listening as well to podcasts and some people who are also competing, and they're saying, it's, of course, it's very important to have an active life, but the diet is the most important as well. Like it's 80% diet and 20% exercise. So if I may ask you as well, because they also talk about how important it is to be active. And these days I was reading a really beautiful post of a yoga influencer whom I'm following and exercise. It's called So Beautiful. And they said how bad, and they called the sitting in front of a computer, it's like smoking nowadays. So what's your exercise routine, but for the diet? Right.
Related to that, I'm still reading and learning. So I've got a book on, a future podcast would go through the 30 books I've got, but the recent one is Fighting Insulin Resistance with Strength Training. And this guy says your muscles are key for absorbing the glucose. And so you need to do some resistance training. So what I do, I've been walking. So I Fitbit and the Fitbit here, and I go 10,000 steps a day is what I try and hit, sometimes more, sometimes less. But, before I changed my diet, I boosted my walking for a month, and it made no difference on my weight because I was eating junk. So you can't outrun a bad diet is what they say a lot, makes sense. So what I do now, I have a combination of strength training. I do sit a bunch, but I try and get up regularly and walk around and do stuff. I have a standing place where I can stand and work. My feet tend to hurt, but I've got different things I stand on, foam pads that help. But I always do resistance training. So every other day I do a set of barbells, dumbbells, 3 sets of 8, pull and push. But then I read Ben Bickman's book, and he says that's the dopiest resistance training to do. It just makes your muscles look stronger, but it's not. You need core training. So these resistance people just talk about using body weight, in a chair and pushing yourself up and down. It's for the audience that can't figure out what that means. I had to show them. So there's a whole bunch of exercises, more I should do, planks, push-ups to build my core strength. And so I like this, the Biden administration Build Back Better. I'm not a fan of the infrastructure spending, but I am a fan of my own infrastructure. I want to build myself back better. So I'm down at 190 now, but in college I was at 200 and I was weightlifting and playing basketball and I was much more muscular. So having a goal, I want to build, I know I can't be the same as I was in my 20s, but I can build core strength, musculature. CrossFit is all about that, and other clubs to try and build back some of those strengths. Anyway, but so some resistance training. I mowed the lawn yesterday. That wore me out. So some outdoor activities in the yard are helpful.
Yeah, that's actually the best one. My grandpa, I remember grandpa used to do the lawn every single day, and he was very active and in shape every single day. I guess that's the key to exercise. And I have now the last question, which is a little bit maybe out and not out of topic, but this podcast that we used to do, and I'm reading it well, made me think a lot, especially of marketing, economy, and food and diet. And I do believe that the diet is also, and all the packaging, the marketing packaging that actually the society pushes towards us without us realizing, it's actually also a bad habit, and governments are doing money with our health, right? And I'm saying that just because, for example, when you go to Costco and you see the bag chip, it's so beautiful, and the marketing and the package is so attractive that it enters to your eyes, but then it's just huge, the size of it. So how do you think economy and marketing impacts diet, nutrition, and health-wise, in your opinion, as an economist?
Yeah. So one of the doctors, Atia, has a neat little video where he talks about the overall problem, and he's not meat or plant-based as much, but he's very critical of the Western pattern diet, the SAD, standard American diet, which I think you're referring to. And he says, the key thing in the food industry, the food has to be palatable so people like it, and it has to be it has to be cheap to make it, less expensive to make, and it has to have a long shelf life. And so he adds these different things up, and that's what you get at Costco. So when I order this box of Milano cookies for my uncle, they seemed tasty before, but they were inexpensive in this box. They last a long, long time, and my uncle liked them, and I liked them. I used to eat them. But they're not nutritious. They're they're ultra processed, and they have a little dark chocolate in them, but who knows what else is in it. The package is hardly big enough to put all the ingredients on it. So that said, and so when I buy foods, there's a PCC, Pacific Consumers Co-op, next to Trader Joe's near me, and it's got all this natural food. It's amazing, but everything is so expensive. Everything is about twice the price I'm expecting to pay. Now, could I afford it? Sure. Could buy less books, less gadgets, fewer pairs of shoes, buy better food. So I'm cheap like most people, but that said, there's big money to be made in producing high quality foods and distributing. So now there's like 100 companies in the low carb, carnivore, keto, as well as the vegan and vegetarian space, making products that are inexpensive. They're relatively inexpensive. They're more expensive than the cheap stuff. As an example, the protein drink. There's Ensure protein drink that I used to drink. It's packed full of sugar and vegetable oils and who knows what. But there's a company called Orgain that has the protein drink. It's twice as expensive, but there's one that's plant-based and one that's clean animal protein, from New Zealand somehow. And so I switched to that. It's got much, much less sweetener in it. It still has the protein. And so, but that company can make a ton of money. I mean, it's just because it isn't Procter & Gamble or some giant corporation, but as they succeed, the big corporations will come out with similar products. And Campbell Soup, for example, They have the regular Campbell soup full of salt and ingredients, but they have another Campbell soup that's called Simply Something, and it's got way less ingredients, way less salt, because it's marketing to this small but growing market of people who are caring about this stuff. So it costs more, but companies will respond to this. They want you to buy local whole foods and cook your meals at home. But I'm not, I do that sometimes, but I don't do that a lot. So anyway, so my answer to you is yeah, there's a problem with the food industry. I would tend to blame the federal guidelines that mandated, that pushed the low fat and the various theories that they had in the 70s, 80s. And they pushed the food industry into this. You can blame the food industry for being greedy and profit maximizing and so forth, but they're happy to make money however they can. And if they can make money selling you really healthy, good foods, they're going to do that too, would be my way of looking at it.
Yeah, sadly, but that's the truth. But no, this was actually really nice and really helpful. I was curious to hear your perspective on this, because I do have my own theory, but it's nice to hear and brings a lot of added value from a perspective of an economist. And I really enjoyed our talks and debating what intrigues us, and it was a pleasure having you. And I would also love to continue to have this series, maybe something to be or something that might be of interest of our listener can be thyroid and how it's related. And I definitely can share with all of you some of my things that I'm battling as a person who suffers of thyroid, and what best works for me and what type of aliments.
Okay.
So it was a pleasure. Thank you so much again.
Okay. Thank you very much. I enjoyed talking to you.
Soon.
Thanks. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.